1999, Sega developed and released Seaman for the Sega Dreamcast. The whole premise and concept of Seaman was that it was a virtual pet that went through different life cycles and that the player had to take care of the pet to have it grow, live, and die. These were stages. These stages of life were Mushroomer. In its first days of life, a gilman where it had a humanoid face and a small fish-like body. Most pictures and media of games related to Seaman show it in this state. Podfish, where the seaman is still fish-like but has frog-like appendages, being legs. After mating, the fish die. A new evolutionary stage of Toddman comes for the player. Looking like gilman, they are deep voices unlike the prior stages of development. Eventually, it would evolve into a frogman, where it's an amphibious creature instead of a fish, where it still has a humanoid face and a frog-like body. It's also assumed and hinted at once the player releases the frogman into the wild, it will lay eggs to start the whole cycle all over again. Seaman was actually extraordinarily popular in Japan when it was released, selling a large amounts of copies of the game and being called one of the best-selling games in Japan on the Dreamcast at the time. There were some feelings of Japanese leadership within Sega not to release the game in the United States because of cultural differences, or the American gaming market just not understanding the game. Unsurprisingly, it didn't sell that well in the United States, but at the time, Sega was desperate as a company to publish as much games as it could to be put onto the Dreamcast market internationally, so they thought that the risk would be worth it, when tragically it was not. A personal computer version of Seaman was also devised, but eventually abandoned due to lack of support from Sega development. However, as mentioned, Seaman was very popular in Japan, and as a result of this, a sequel was released only for the PlayStation 2 in Japan, years after the Dreamcast ceased production in 2001, Seaman 2 being released in Japan in 2007. What's interesting is that Seaman became a sort of a minor cultural phenomenon in Japan in the early 2000s because of the quirky appeal that the Seaman games had with the Japanese public. Originally, Sega leadership actually thought that the concept of Seaman was disgusting and strange, but decided to go with it because they thought it would be interesting to have something different like Seaman as a gaming franchise to help differentiate the Dreamcast from the Sony PlayStation 2, which was then its most serious gaming competition. Though the full realization of Seaman couldn't be done as a pet simulator the way the Sega developers originally wanted to, due to gaming technology limits at the time. But even after all this, the appeal of Seaman from its creators were particularly strong, as there were accounts of Nintendo trademarking a title as quote-unquote mysterious pet, legend of the fish with a human face, back in 2012 and 2013, with the focus from Nintendo at putting a proposed third Seaman game or possible reboot onto the Nintendo 3DS handheld console. But theories even went as far as it being a spiritual successor to the Seaman franchise, not actually being a direct sequel to the franchise. It's now assumed that since so much time has passed since a Seaman game has been made, if a new game is indeed developed and created, it would either be a complete reboot for the franchise or taking the games in an entirely new direction from the original Seaman pet simulator game released for the Dreamcast. Sometimes a character can be forgotten, but could also be a trend of the times and country that they were in.